It all started with a simple message on the screen. Journalists from all corners of the globe began to connect. It started as a whisper, a single message. The leak turned into a whirlwind of information. John Doe watched as the world reacted in real time. In the end, he wondered if the truth was worth the chaos.
In the world of offshore banking and secrecy, a firm once known as Mossack Fonseca sat at the very heart of it. Founded by German immigrant Jürgen Mossack in 1977, the law firm would eventually expand to 42 countries and employ more than 600 staff. Ramon Fonseca would join the firm in 1986. While it is not widely known how the pair initially met, some accounts suggest they first met while managing the assets of Saudi businessman and international arms dealer Adnan Khashoggi. According to Ramon Fonseca, the two men, Jürgen Mossack and Ramon Fonseca, first collaborated while managing the purchase of a yacht for Khashoggi. At this time, around 1980, Khashoggi sold his yacht, the Nabila, to a sheikh who was one of Mossack's clients. In addition to the purchase, the sheikh also wanted a helipad installed on the yacht, which Jürgen Mossack and Ramon Fonseca worked out the details on together while establishing a rapport in the process.
In the quiet marina, a luxurious yacht is anchored. Ramon Fonseca confidently walks towards the yacht and meets Jürgen Mossack on the deck. They tour the yacht, marveling at its opulence. The tension rises as they sit across from each other, deliberating and signing paperwork. With the deal completed, they stand on the deck, celebrating their triumph.
As they got to know each other more and more, they realized they had many shared interests and ambitions that they would strive to achieve together. The two men would develop a sacred pact and bond together, which they would remain loyal to for the rest of their lives. Their story, years later, would come to be known as the Panama Papers.
Several world leaders are under fire this morning after being implicated in the so-called Panama Papers.
We turn now to the banking bombshell causing shockwaves around the world, the so-called Panama Papers.
A massive whistleblower leak involving more than 11 million documents exposed how global leaders, celebrities, and crime figures hide their cash offshore.
In the news over the last couple of days, we've had another reminder in this big dump of data coming out of Panama that tax avoidance is a big global problem.
4 decades of documents, over 11 million files accusing banks, businessmen, and over 140 politicians in 50 countries of working the system to avoid paying taxes.
Believe it or not, Vladimir Putin, David Cameron, and Emma Watson all have something in common: ties to the Panama Papers.
The Justice Department announced Tuesday it's indicted 4 men connected to the 2016 Panama Papers investigation.
Lo de Panama Papers está equivocado. Nosotros somos grandes incorporadores, pero afuera, en las Islas Vírgenes, en Bahamas, en Nevada.
No shares, no offshore trusts, no offshore funds, nothing like that.
In our understanding, this is nothing else but a reflection of, let's say, an overwhelmed Putinophobia disease.
A lot of it's legal, but that's exactly the problem.
Gente ahora está diciendo que son todo este montón de gente que nosotros no conocemos, que nunca en la vida hemos visto, que son nuestros clientes, lo cual es falso e injusto.
It's not unique to other countries because, frankly, there are folks here in America who are taking advantage of the same stuff. And unless the United States and other countries lead by example in closing some of these loopholes and provisions, then in many cases you can trace what's taking place, but you can't stop it.
Born on March 20th, 1948 in the city of Fürth, Germany, located directly beside Nuremberg, Jürgen Rolf Dieter Mossack was raised by his mother, Elder Mossack, who was a saleswoman, and his father, Erhard Mossack, who was a mechanical engineer and a World War II veteran who served as a Rottenführer, a senior corporal in the Nazi Party. His specific assignment was in the Totenkopf division of the Waffen-SS, a unit notorious for its brutality in combat and operation of concentration camps. In March 1945, 2 months before Germany's surrender, Erhard Mossack, only 21 years old at the time, was captured by US forces. After 9 months of captivity, Erhard, along with 7 other POWs, stole a truck and escaped from the prison camp near Le Havre, France. Right as they were about to cross back into Germany, they were ambushed by a French sentry. Erhard, along with 2 other comrades, fled before being recaptured.
Erhard breaks free at dawn, racing through the fog. He finds a hidden tunnel beneath a wooden crate. Erhard disappears into the mist, moving quickly. Inside the tunnel, he hears soldiers' voices echoing. Erhard emerges into a dense forest, catching his breath. Venturing deeper, he reflects on his uncertain future.
They fled to Cologne, Germany. Once there, they split up and went their own separate ways. To blend in with the public, Erhard Mossack went to a physician to remove his tattoos linking him to the Waffen-SS. After World War II, Erhard worked as a ranch hand on a farm. Shortly thereafter, he was approached by a former Nazi propagandist who invited him to join the German Communist Party. An offer he rejected. 2 months later, a man claiming to be a former high-ranking member of the Nazi Party approached Erhard, stating that he was secretly building an underground network of secret agents, and offered the young man 2 choices. He could either join a network of rogue Soviet agents or a network of dissidents attempting to restore fascist rule in Europe. Erhard took the latter option, to restore fascist rule in Europe.
In the late 1940s, Erhard Mossack stands by the barn at dawn. The elderly man gives Erhard 2 choices. Erhard decides to join the resistance. He meets operatives in dimly lit places. Erhard waits in the shadows for the informant. He hesitates and the informant escapes.
This mysterious man who approached Erhard was not a former member of the Nazi Party. He was not building a secret network of spies for the Soviets or of fascists in Europe. He was nothing more than a conniving con artist and saw Erhard as an easy target for manipulation. Erhard fell for the scheme. What made Erhard such an easy mark, having grown up in Nazi Germany and joining the Hitler Youth at the age of 15, the young Erhard was deeply indoctrinated with Nazi ideology. In May 1946, a former SS officer bent on resurrecting the Reich approached Erhard and attempted to recruit him. Erhard respectfully declined and told the man that he was already a member of another underground network set on restoring fascism in Europe. The man politely accepted his decline, yet continued to invite Erhard over to his house, claiming he had some forged passports Erhard could use to travel around Europe incognito. Erhard accepted the invite and followed the man. Later that night, Erhard was ambushed and apprehended by a team of US Army intelligence officers.
The so-called former SS officer who approached him that day was not an SS officer at all. He was an undercover agent for the United States.
In post-Wifutu Germany, Erhard works on a remote ranch. An elderly man approaches, offering forged passports. Erhard follows him across the muddy field. Suddenly, agents burst in, catching Erhard off guard. Erhard feels betrayed as agents surround him. He offers to cooperate for his freedom.
While in custody,
Erhard gave the interrogators an elaborate and Byzantine story of his life, telling them that he had joined the rogue network of covert agents as a ploy to gather intelligence for the United States, as opposed to facing charges for the Le Havre prison break. The interrogators were skeptical of his story.
In a dimly lit room, Erhard sits bruised and battered. Flashbacks reveal him in smoky cafes, exchanging coded messages. Erhard recounts his sabotage missions, infiltrating the rogue network. The officers scrutinize his tale, questioning his motives. Desperate to avoid charges for his prison escape, Erhard pleads for their belief. The officers exchange a glance, leaving Erhard's fate hanging in the balance.
Regardless of whether his real motive was to be an informant for the US or not, his story worked. He brokered a deal with the agents and was released from custody. Shortly after this encounter, Erhard met the love of his life, Elda. The two married and would have 4 children together, Jürgen being the first. After giving birth to all 4 children, the Mossacks packed their bags and moved to Panama. Upon arriving in Panama in the early 1960s, the family landed in a country controlled by a white oligarchy and torn between socio-economic divides. During this time, the US still had control over the Panama Canal Zone, which was a source of deep resentment for the Panamanians. Due to its strategic location, Panama was a key player in US intelligence operations in Latin America, making it fertile ground for espionage, surveillance, and back-channel diplomacy. The perfect spot for a former SS officer turned US asset to conduct his post-World War II intelligence operations. According to a declassified CIA report, Erhard contacted the agency in 1963, offering to courier intel on communist Cuba. According to the report, Mossack persistently sought contact with US military intelligence personnel in Panama since 1961, and in 1963 offered to provide a source who could be sent to Cuba within months. The agency noted his eagerness and planned to investigate both the source and Mossack's motives. However, there is no publicly available evidence confirming that the CIA accepted his offer or maintained a lasting relationship with him.
In a dimly lit cafe, Erhard sits nervously, checking his watch. Erhard whispers, "I can move information. Cuba, if you want it." The operative asks about the risks and fallout. They shake hands, sealing the deal. A different man hands Erhard a package and a note. Erhard steps out into the neon-lit streets, ready for his journey.
Throughout the years, Erhard worked for Lufthansa Airlines and dabbled in a series of other jobs. Jürgen, at the time, only spoke German, neither English nor Spanish. Had a hard time acclimating and making friends. Growing up as a very lonely child, isolated from other people, along with the shadow of his father's Nazi past, he had learned to distrust others and keep secrets early on in life.
Jürgen stands alone, feeling isolated. At home, he watches his father burn old papers. In class, he feels even more disconnected. Late at night, he whispers in German. His drawings reflect his complex reality. He finds peace, accepting his journey.
After completing secondary school, Jürgen attended Santa Maria la Antigua Catholic University, where he studied maritime law and earned his bachelor's degree in 1973. After graduating, Jürgen began working for one of Panama's top firms, the Arasamena, Noriega and Castro law firm. While working for the firm, he was relocated to London to establish their operations abroad. After a few years, Jürgen grew increasingly dissatisfied with the firm, feeling undervalued and unappreciated for his hard work.
In a tiny London office, Jürgen's buried in paperwork, dreaming of better days. One evening, a postcard from Panama brings new hope. In 1977, Jürgen arrives in Panama, feeling renewed purpose. He starts his law firm, working tirelessly and making connections. A powerful rival tries to undermine his success. Through determination, Jurgen outmaneuvers his rival, building his empire.
In 1977, he left the firm and moved back to Panama, where he launched his own startup firm, the Jurgen Mossack Law Firm, as a sole practitioner. Being only 29 years old at the time and having very limited experience in practicing law, this was a risky bet for the young Jurgen, who was competing against much older, more experienced and well-established law firms. It was a real nail-biting time, Mossack recalls. I never knew if I would make enough to provide for my family. It is believed around this time that he might have had his first encounter with Ramon Fonseca, who was, at the time, a recent law graduate himself. One day, Fonseca decided to drop by Mossack's office to wish him good luck with his startup firm. Fonseca admired Mossack for his grit, persistence, and determination as an entrepreneur.
Ramon and Jurgen discuss their big plans. They talk about expanding in new markets. Concerns arise, but solutions are found. The team is excited about the plan. They monitor the progress closely, reflecting on their successful journey.
As they spent more time together, they started to realize more and more how much they had in common. Both were ambitious and driven to become members of Panama's elite society among the rich and powerful. Ramon Fonseca, having a big ego and a tough guy complex, couldn't bear the brunt of being a sheep and kissing up to a superior in the corporate world. He had to be in charge. He had to be an alpha. Jurgen Mossack, on the other hand, already knew what it was like to be a sheep in the corporate world, kissing up to someone who doesn't bother to take the time to show their appreciation for your dedication and hard work anyway. The dynamic duo of alpha men paired up and would soon dominate the world of offshore banking and international money laundering. They were determined to become members of Panama's elite by any means necessary. They would create a legacy filled with blood, violence, corruption, and betrayal. Years later, the world would remember their legacy as
the Panama Papers.
After establishing their partnership, Jurgen Mossack and Ramon Fonseca began creating a series of shelf companies, which are aged shell companies, created and left inactive for a period of time, metaphorically meaning put on the shelf to age. A shell company is essentially, as defined by the SEC, a company with either nominal assets and operations or no assets and operations, and assets consisting solely of cash and cash equivalents, or assets consisting of any amount of cash and cash equivalents, and nominal other assets. Shell companies have also been called letterbox companies, considering that they tend not to have any real employees or occupied office buildings. Some only use a postal box, hence the word letterbox. While shell companies can be used for legitimate purposes such as asset protection and tax avoidance, which is a legal form of tax efficiency used to minimize a company or individual's tax burden, they have often been used for illegitimate purposes such as money laundering, terrorist financing, fraud, corruption, and tax evasion, which is, on the other hand, an illegal form of tax fraud which occurs when a company or individual fails to disclose their hidden assets abroad for the sole purpose of evading taxes. The typical structure of a shell company is as follows. It consists of a real, ultimate beneficial owner, a UBO. This is the actual legitimate owner of the company who conceals his identity behind a frontman, which is a nominee UBO. A nominee UBO is someone who acts on behalf of the actual UBO. Then comes the nominee shareholder or shareholders, which is an individual or group of individuals acting as the actual shareholders. If the real UBO wishes to add another layer of anonymity to the shell company, an offshore provider like Mossack Fonseca can give him a nominee director, who someone is the actual director of the company, which only exists on paper. All of the company's decisions are made by the real UBO. Say, for instance, I wanted to establish a new shell company, Blackwater Holdings. I would contact an offshore provider, such as Mossack Fonseca, to help me incorporate the company. Mossack Fonseca would then write the articles of incorporation, memo of association, and letter of indemnity, protecting themselves from financial and legal liability. My identity would be concealed through a nominee UBO, and the identity or identities of the shareholders would be concealed by the nominee shareholders, and the nominee directors would be acting on behalf of my command, while I call all the shots. Sometimes, if the real UBO requests, the ownership of the shell company may only be kept in the form of physical certificates known as bearer shares, and whoever holds the certificate of bearer shares is considered the legal owner, and the offshore provider keeps no record of the name of the actual UBO of the shell company in its records. In other words, whoever holds the bearer shares owns the company.
It's a warm, sunny day, and the park is alive with energy as the kids gather for a fun game. The glowing certificate changes hands, and Mia takes charge with some bold, sweet ideas. Sam jumps in with a colorful idea that gets everyone excited. Leo explains how the certificate represents ownership, sparking their imaginations even more. Together, they combine their ideas into one grand creation, laughing all the way. As the sun sets, they leave the park with smiles, their day full of laughter and friendship.
Upon establishing their partnership, the country of Panama was in major turmoil. Labor strikes roiled across the country. The United States and many other countries publicly denounced Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega's involvement with the Latin American drug cartels. The country was on the brink of defaulting on their loans from both the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. Panama was becoming more and more isolated from the international community. Considering all the turmoil Panama was in, the two men got together and debated on where they could establish their services outside the country. They needed a place that offered company incorporations for either a low fee or no fee on taxes for foreign holdings, government-protected secrecy, politically stable, and minimal competition from other providers, and of course close to Panama. Looking at a map, Mossack and Fonseca decided that the British Virgin Islands was just the place for that.
Heart of Panama City, the weight of a crumbling nation looms heavy. Amid the chaos, a bold idea begins to take shape. Working against the clock, they prepare for the leap. As the city stirs, the tension in the air is palpable. Leaving behind the ruins, they take to the skies. Above the clouds, a new chapter begins.
After establishing their services in the British Virgin Islands, they continued to sell shelf companies both domestically and abroad. Their firm would eventually expand to over 40 countries, becoming one of the largest and most influential offshore providers in the world.
As the plane touched down, the island's warmth and secrecy seemed to welcome them. In the quiet office, they began piecing together their ambitious plan. The office buzzed with activity as their empire started to take shape. Doubts crept in, but the lure of wealth quickly silenced them. Their creation had reshaped the world, leaving them to reflect on its impact. What began as a paradise now stood exposed under the harsh light of scrutiny.
Their early clients included wealthy, upper-class businessmen, politicians, and large multinational corporate banks, including HSBC, UBS, and Credit Suisse, which partnered with Mossack Fonseca to establish thousands of offshore entities. Their clientele included a myriad of international criminals and terrorists. One of Mossack Fonseca's most notable long-term clients was a company called Casewell Services, which was linked to Namibian arms dealer Walter Helwax, who was one of their clients for over 15 years. While conducting business in the lovely archipelago of islands, they would eventually incorporate over 100,000 companies in the BVI, where they continued to mass-produce pre-registered entities for sale used to hide beneficial ownership. By By the early 1990s, they were incorporating approximately 10,000 companies per year. As they grew, they rapidly advanced their secrecy-as-a-service methods and anonymity procedures, making them stand out worldwide as the global go-to tax haven for the world's global elites. Their first decade in business, from the late 80s to the late 90s, involved quiet expansion, strategic partnerships, and a clientele cloaked in discretion. Major multinational corporate banks such as HSBC, UBS, and Credit Suisse were some of Mossack Fonseca's earliest intermediaries, who used the law firm to incorporate thousands of offshore entities for high-net-worth clients. Very rarely, if ever, did they interact with their end clients. Most of their business was conducted through professional intermediaries such as lawyers, accountants, and wealth advisors, who protected the identities of the actual beneficiaries. Based on the data from the Panama Papers leak, some of Mossack Fonseca's other earliest notable clients include former Sudanese President Ahmed al-Migani, former UAE President Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed Al Nahyan, former Saudi intelligence chief Sheikh Kamal Adam, and former Argentinian President Mauricio Macri. In part 2 of this exclusive series, we will cover more depth of these notable figures' involvement with Mossack Fonseca and their links to offshore banking. Until then, subscribe to stay tuned.